Do not settle for the crumbs. You should have the whole cake, the icing, and the cherry on top too.
The Crumbs, episode 16. We are back, and we've got an unfamiliar face in the studio. Jordan, welcome.
It's good to be here. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
We're excited to have you, and it was... Look, I'm not going to lie, people watching, and I hope, Caro, you're watching. You're probably not. But you're on the outer, my friend, because you decided to travel halfway around the world, go to Vegas. I mean, you are studying, so I support that. But you're not here, and the reality is the show must go on. You weren't available today. We have recruited our amazing mate, Padge, is producing for us here at the Crumbs. So we've got a new co-host, Jordan. We're very excited, and I'm pumped because often in women's sport, women love talking about women's sport. Not as many men love talking about women's sport. So it's really cool when we had this conversation. And I said, what do you think? You were sort of really keen. Like, when I mentioned this to you, what were your initial thoughts about coming onto the pod?
Yeah, it sounded perfect. I'm a huge footy fan. Unfortunately, a St Kilda fan. But I love all aspects of footy, men's footy. And when the women's competition was introduced back almost 10 years ago now, I was really hyped. And it was a couple of years before St Kilda came into the competition. But ever since then, I've watched plenty of the matches, been to some, would be familiar with the teams. And yeah, I mean, women's sports in general is something that, you know, is just as important as men's sports in all aspects. So it's really, really exciting to be able to speak about that.
Yeah, awesome. And there's cool stuff to talk about, and we're going to get into that today. But before we do, I've got a quick fire quiz so the listeners can get to know a bit more about you. And I haven't given you any heads up here. So we're just rolling. Your favourite sport first, what is it?
AFL footy, absolutely.
Your favourite league in the world? Any league, you can choose anyone.
Sporting league, I can't say AFL again, so I'll go outside that. I'll go NBA, big fan of the NBA.
Yeah, NBA, love it. Who's your favourite athlete? And I want you to give me your favourite male athlete and your favourite female athlete.
Ooh, tough one. My favourite male athlete changes all the time. It's usually just whoever's had the best performance for St Kilda on the weekend. So this week I'm going to have to say Jack Sinclair after his career high 40. Female athlete, that is tough. I guess I have to stay local, stay Australian gun. I'm going to have to say Ash Barty because she's amazing, such an inspiration. Yeah,
cool. Good answer. Your favourite sporting venue, and you might give me one you've been to and one you really want to go to. What's a bucket list item?
Okay. Been to, probably going to say MCG. I haven't been to, I think, any sporting venues outside of Australia. And I think I've only been to one outside of Victoria, and that was the SCG. But yeah, the Melbourne Cricket Ground's incredible. Especially being part of a crowd that's, you know, upwards of 90,000 people. It's insane. And in terms of one I'd like to go to, I'm a huge Arsenal fan. So Emirates Stadium over in London. I've been outside with my dad, but haven't been able to watch a match. But I think the atmosphere would just be incredible, and that's something I definitely want to tick off the bucket list.
Nice. Last one, favourite event or tournament worldwide that you love to follow?
I'm a big fan of the World Cup. Soccer World Cup. I always get around with mates, try to watch as many games as possible. And that's one that's always been on the top of my mind. But only starting recently, I've really gotten into March Madness. Cool. You know, I think it brings an absolute amazing buzz and excitement that it really isn't matched anywhere. And, you know, just for that 1 month competition, it's incredible.
Good timing. We're going to talk March Madness. And the thing that I love about March Madness is the women's March Madness has overtaken men's March Madness, certainly for viewership. Our rundown today, we're going to do a bit of a preview of the WNBA draft that's coming up in April in less than 2 weeks. You're going to talk a bit about March Madness. I'm going to give the listeners who've been on the Crumbs journey for a while have heard us talk about the Professional Women's Hockey League Takeover Tour. We've probably talked it to death, but Caro and I have loved following this, and it's finally finished. So we've got a few stats, and we're going to talk about expansion in the PWHL. And then you're going to talk a bit of women's football, which I'm interested in because I don't know a lot about it. We know a little bit about the Tillies, and we've talked Tillies football. good luck to the Tillies. They play tonight.
Good luck.
In a friendly match. And then, in great news for the viewers, we've got a special guest. In great news for us, because we've got Dr. Sophia Nimphius, an expert sports scientist who's coming. She's going to be online. She's in Perth, and she's joining us for a chat to talk about women and ACL injuries, which is another topic we've followed on the Crumbs. But to kick us off, so March Madness has sort of coincided with, this has snuck up on us, I think. So obviously 2024, the year of the growth of women's sport, but really, and I know you're going to talk about Caitlin Clark when we come to March Madness, but it's driven this following in women's sport, and more specifically women's basketball, that's sort of propelled March Madness, but it's propelled this league. We've seen Unrivaled just completed a couple of weeks ago. And now on the 14th of April, it's the next draft. So it's like flick the switch on Caitlin Clark. And really, we're moving to Paige Beckers, because that's who's going to go number one. And we're going to talk about that. It's being held in New York. The favourite absolutely is Paige. On our Instagram, we highlighted at the start of the week, she dropped 40 points. It was a high for her and her team during the Elite Eight competition during March Madness. But we saw a little bit of a shake-up when Olivia Miles said, or came out on Instagram. I love how everyone posts everything on social media now, and that's how the word spreads, which is awesome for us because we can follow it from abroad. But she's in the transfer portal, so she's going to play another year. She's got another year of NCAA eligibility. She's not in the draft, which has sort of thrown a spanner in the works, so to speak. And it's adjusted things, but it hasn't really adjusted Paige. She sits there as number one. Number two, you may not. I'm not sure if you know who Dominique is. Do you know her at all? Have you heard of her?
I know that she's she plays in France at the moment. I know she's 19 years old, I believe. She's a centre and is absolutely crazy, averaging I think 20 and 10 over in that league. Insane.
She's a baby. And if you go and search for her online, there's a bunch of videos that sort of went viral because no one's seen this. She's 6'6", a massive forward. She played in the 2024 Olympics for France, and obviously they finished runner-up to the US. She's got a silver medal in her back pocket. She's tipped to go number two. And then number three, Sonia Citron from the good old Irish Notre Dame. Versatile both ends. She's known as a really good rebounder from her guard spot, but she can sort of do everything, and that's what the teams are looking for at the moment. So they're touted as the top three, but you've sort of been following Paige, particularly over the last few weeks. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I've been fortunate enough to watch a couple of the UConn games that Paige has been taking part of. And like you mentioned, she had her career-high 40 points in that Sweet 16 win over Oklahoma. And even recently, just this week, she had another 31 against South Carolina on Monday. And over the tournament, she's averaging 29 points per game, which is nuts. Like, it's unheard of. Like you said, she's declared she's expected to go number one, and there's probably nothing that's going to take her off that pedestal. And even just earlier today, she was announced the winner of the Wade Trophy, which I'm not sure if you know, but is the Women's College Basketball Association's Div 1 Player of the Year, which is one of the highest honours. It's been given to seven Huskies previously in the history of the award, including big names such as Sue Bird, Brianna Stewart, and Diana Taurasi. So you can know the level of the award given out there, which is a huge honour.
Three of the biggest names ever to take the court in women's basketball.
And now you've got Paige's name in that honour, which is huge for her.
Yeah, amazing. We'll be watching this, and I do believe now that if anyone has got Disney Plus, now we can follow it on ESPN because it's going to be broadcast. But just a little bit about the draft. For those of you watching who don't know a lot about it, there'll be 38 selections this year, 3 rounds, 13 picks in each round. There are only 12 in the first round. Now, Caro and I talked about De'Erica Hamby, who was, I want to say, ousted from the Las Vegas Aces. There were issues, and ultimately what happened based on the outcome of that is that they were found, the Aces, of violating league rules when it came to impermissible player benefits and workplace policies. And this is sort of flown under the radar, the outcome of this, but The Aces will not have a pick in the first round. So as I said, 13 picks in each of the other rounds, 12 in the first. Now, it's reverse order of the final standings from the previous year. So the bottom 4 teams, they go into a lottery. So it's not like the AFL where the last place team just get the number 1 pick. The bottom 4 teams go in a lottery. The LA Sparks, who had their worst record in franchise history last year, they only won 8 games for the season. They were touted a really good chance. So if you finish last, you have a higher percentage chance in the lottery of getting number 1 pick. They did not get the number 1 pick. They got the number 2 pick, which they now don't have anyway because they traded it away. There was a 3-player trade, and Seattle now have the number 2 pick. So the poor old Sparks don't have that pick. It's going to be really interesting to follow this. And I actually was really lucky. I went to an LA Sparks press conference last week when they introduced our 2 amazing Aussies, Shanice Swain and Annalie Maley, and it was awesome. And we'll put an article up about that over the next few days. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what happens with this. Dallas, of course, have the first pick for the first time in their franchise's history, and obviously a little bit like the Fever getting Caitlin Clark. This could be, what sort of delivers them some results this year. Seattle, obviously, number 2. And Washington hold the best hand here. So they've got 3 picks in the top 6. They've got pick 3, 4, and 6. So that's massive. In a draft class that we know, from what we've seen in March Madness, is going to be huge. Like we've got some legit players who are coming out of college basketball. So we'll be watching the draft, and probably in a couple of weeks when we're on episode 18 or 19, we're going to talk about the draft, and I think we're going to have some WNBA predictions this year. You, myself, and Caro. If Caro can be bothered coming back, let's see how that goes. But just leading into that, you've been following this. I've been following this pretty closely too. But March Madness has just been insane, and women's March Madness has sort of taken the pedestal.
Yeah, absolutely. They just finished up their Elite 8 earlier this week. And, I'll do a quick review of that. So UConn beat University of South Carolina by 14 points. Like I mentioned earlier, Paige had 31 points, 6 assists and 4 steals. Absolute stuff, the stat board. She's killing it. And Sarah Strong by name, strong by nature, 22 and 17 boards as well. Moving on to the next game, Duke played against South Carolina. And South Carolina won that one 54-40, so just nipped them over there. And some big performances from South Carolina players as well. Sanya Fegan had 12 points, 8 rebounds, and Chloe Kitts 14 points too. Texas got it over the TCU Horned Frogs. I love that name, by the way. That is absolutely iconic.
The best.
So we saw the end of Hailey Van Lith run, a superstar, absolutely loved by fans. But the real name was Madison Booker out there. She had 18.6 rebounds, absolutely killed it, and she's a huge name in March Madness altogether.
Yep.
And in the final game, UCLA beat LSU 72-65. Flower J. Johnson put up an absolutely insane performance, 28 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. Not only that, but she also put up 2 steals and 2 blocks, which is all around amazing. So those were those 4 games, and all of those close games, really just interesting to watch and really fun to watch. And in fact, touching on that, the people watched. A lot of people watched, and it's really good to see, because tuning into this Final Four, it'll be insane viewership for NCAAW, and it's sort of taken on that path from last year and the year before that as well.
Yep.
So this will be the first year without Caitlin Clark in the system. And even without Caitlin Clark, those Elite 8 games, in terms of viewership, all 4 of those games are the top 10 of all time Elite 8 games in NCAAW.
Amazing.
Which is incredible. And, that's without Caitlin Clark, who, let's not slander her name, she's an amazing player. But that's without her, and it can prove that what the future is for women's basketball and NCAAW, because these numbers are incredible, and it's getting to that point where the performance is beyond the men's aspect of that game.
Yeah.
And it's really incredible to see, just from an outsider view. And yeah, it's fun to watch as well. Extremely fun to watch. So the 2 games coming up, as you got up on the screen here, we got Texas versus South Carolina, and then Page and UConn are taking on UCLA. These could go either way. And
I'm so excited for this because we were in the US earlier in the year and saw South Carolina play. I'm. Can they do it again? I mean, what they accomplished last year was pretty phenomenal, but they've been up and down this year. UCLA have been sort of lights out.
Yeah,
and
they've
then
been solid.
You've got Page and UConn. Like, I don't know. There's so many twists and turns here. I'll be watching, and that you're right. The viewership is going to be out of this world.
Absolutely, yeah. It's going to be some insane matchups. Paige, this coming into her 4th year. Well, this is her 4th year in the system, and unfortunately, she hasn't got up to that final stage yet. She hasn't won that national chip, and it's a real good opportunity for her to get that under her belt before she gets drafted.
Predictions?
It's tough. It's really tough. Like you said, UCLA have looked incredible, lights out, super solid, but I got it back in Paige. She's been thrilling to watch over the last 4 years, and I really do want her to take that next step. What do you think about the Texas game?
I'm just taking South Carolina to win the whole thing.
Really?
I'm a massive Dawn Staley fan. I just think when push comes to shove, the teams that have been there before and know how to win will get it done. So that's my tip.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair enough.
So let's see what happens. But you were talking about the numbers, and like the actual figures are
incredible.
They're crazy.
They're crazy to see.
I've loved watching it, and there are and we have to preface this, like, the men's March Madness is huge too, and the viewership for the men's March Madness has been pretty significant as well. But I think at a point in time where we were all sort of watching, going, what's going to happen now that Caitlin Clark's not here? Everyone was predicting a fall in viewership, and it hasn't happened, even if the numbers aren't necessarily as high as they were when she was playing. They're still up on 2023. They're still up on every other year. So, look, you're right. It sets the scene for the future. I think the sport's in a good place, and obviously women's basketball's in a good place. I want to talk a little bit about the Takeover Tour for the Professional Women's Hockey League. We've talked about this quite a lot, Caro and I. We've been following along. The PWHL promoted this. They promoted the hell out of this, and they've done a fantastic job this season. They had 8 different destinations or locations, and really it was connected directly to the expansion of the league that's going to happen over the next couple of years. Now, we've had all 8 legs. We had a total of just over 123,000 people attend. You can see the figures on the screen there. Vancouver, Quebec and Edmonton had the most. Vancouver had over 19,000. They sold out in minutes. Tickets were literally sold out in minutes. You couldn't get a ticket. And the players in particular love playing, obviously, in front of sold-out crowds when potentially they're used to playing, in front of a couple of thousand people. Probably some of them less than that. But there was an average of 14,378 fans per game, obviously massive. In Vancouver, that 19,038 is the most people that have attended, or a higher attended game than Vancouver's actual NHL team.
In any game this season.
Of any game in 2024-25 season. So that in itself, gives you a good snapshot of where things are at. And now what's going to happen? Where are we going to end up with our next couple of teams in the Women's Professional Hockey League? I've got the US and the Canadian flags on there because the discussion, obviously, after looking at the numbers, just shows you Canada's want and thirst to have a professional team there. And then the league has sort of been really pumping up Seattle. They've been talking about this for a long time. And Seattle, they think is a good marketplace. They did have a decent attendance there. But can good old Climate Pledge Arena, the home of the mighty GOAT, Lauren Jackson's jersey, and Sue Bird, have to mention her too, but of course LJ's an Aussie, can the arena house the WNBL, the NHL, obviously the Seattle Kraken are already there? Can they have a professional women's league? And can they also have a future NBA team? Because I've done the tour there, and they've set up locker rooms and everything for the NBA team that would obviously become the future or the new Seattle Supersonics from back in the day. Back in my day, you weren't born then, Jordan. But that's sort of the question. Is it the right place given what else is happening there and how many organisations already exist? I mean, what are your thoughts? Have you seen any of this? Have you been following it?
I'll be honest, this has been something that's sort of skipped past me, but I have heard a lot about the Seattle Supersonics NBA especially. I have heard a lot of talks about bringing in another team into the NBA. I've heard talks of relocating. I think Las Vegas has come into conversation as well. But just looking up on the board there, 4 different sports franchises fitting into the one arena, it seems pretty insane. And a lot of work will have to go into that for it to happen. But at the same time, I think it would just be awesome for the WNHL to expand to that. And I think that would be incredible. Yep,
absolutely. That announcement is coming in the next couple of days, it's predicted. So by the time we meet again, we will discuss where that landed. But you're going to talk a bit of women's football.
Yeah, so I'm an Arsenal fan by nature. My dad grew up as an Arsenal fan, and I just sort of carried along with that. It's brought me some tears along the way, but it's very much like St Kilda, very very inconsistent, not much success. But in terms of the women's Super
hang on,
League,
is St Kilda your dad's fault too, or?
No, fortunately, okay. No. I don't know how that arrived because neither my mum or dad are St Kilda supporters. But anyway, that's for a different story. Women's Super League. So, like you see up there, Arsenal are in second at the moment. They're 6 points behind Chelsea. That's a games won, so that's not the. So we're 6 points behind Chelsea. We're level with Man United, and it's tight. There's 4 games left in the season. And, Chelsea have some difficult fixtures coming up. They've got Liverpool and Tottenham, who are big teams in that aspect. And Arsenal should have some points behind their back. So it'll be good to see how that finishes up. That'll finish up by the end of next month. But in terms of Arsenal themselves, they're playing in the Champions League semi-final, which is huge, very exciting. They came back from 2-0 down against Real Madrid in the last leg to win 3-0 at home, which was absolutely amazing. Wow. I followed that on the socials and everyone went crazy because it's like an unprecedented comeback. It was incredible. So that next game against Olympique Lyon, it will be tough, very tough. They've got the most titles. They've got 8 Champions League titles, and the next best is Barcelona with 3. So clearly a level beyond the next team. So it will be a tough matchup, but I do back in our girls to get that over the line. Speaking of ours, we've got 3 Australians playing for that team, which is incredible because, Tillies are obviously a great team, but to have 3 Australians represent one of the greatest teams in England, in Europe essentially, is incredible. And I'll touch on those 3 now. So we've got Steph Catley. She's a defender. Everyone's heard of her. She's solid down back for the Tillies. Great to watch. She's played 27 matches and has kept 13 clean sheets over the course of this season. So that's incredible. My personal fave, Kyra Cooney-Cross. I think she's got one of the best names in English football. Yeah. She's a midfielder. She's played 32 games. She's absolutely a defensive stud. No one gets past her. She's also provided a goal and 3 assists of her own. And Caitlin Ford, she's a winger. She's a goal scoring machine. You can see that when she plays for the Tillies. Just like the other girls, everyone loves her. Everyone gets behind her. And it's really good to see her in action. She's played 34 matches, got 11 goals and 7 assists herself. So I'll be tuning in to that first leg against Olympique Lyon. And I think it'll be a great game to watch. And I'll be supporting our Aussie girls as well.
Fantastic. Great recap and great to hear that all 3 of them are doing so well over there. Okay, we're very excited to welcome a special guest this afternoon, episode 16 of the Crumbs. It's the first guest we've had on, so it's big shoes here for our expert. She's all the way from Perth. She's online today, and not only is she an expert in her field, which is sports science, amongst other things, but we'll get into that a bit later, but Dr. Sophia Nimphius, welcome to the Crumbs.
Thanks for having me, Simone, and thanks for having me as well, Jordan. Great to be on Crumbs.
I want to intro Soph, and this will be difficult because she's got a long and distinguished history in sport and out of sport, and in particular in academia and research in a sports setting. She is from WA. She's the Pro Vice Chancellor of Sport and Professor of Human Performance at Edith Cowen University in WA, a really a fantastic university over in Perth. She's previously held roles as high performance of sports science and a sports science coordinator at Softball Australia, and that's actually how we met, I think, and in baseball, Soph, as well. And she's worked in a number of different organisations. She's a strategist, an innovator, and she's known for challenging the status quo. With over 2 decades now of experience in elite sport, she possesses an acute understanding of the drivers of human performance, and she's leveraged this expertise to become, what I love here, Soph, a change maker and a thought leader in sport and beyond. We've got you here today because we want to talk in particular to you, and I know Jordan's really interested in this as well, about ACL injuries and women athletes. Now, give us a bit of a snapshot first before we get into ACLs about your journey so far in sport and how you've sort of ended up where you are.
Yeah, thanks, Simone, and thanks for the intro, of course. I guess the quick summary of how I ended up where I am and where I started was probably an athlete myself. So definitely started as an athlete, and when it started getting serious was probably, like most of us, towards high school. And I narrowed down to 2 sports, so softball and basketball as the 2 sports I wanted to specialize in. But I knew I wasn't going to go pro. It was a different world back then, so I wanted to get the best out of those 2 sports I could. So I wanted to play both sports in college or at uni. So I went to a university that actually recruited me for both. So I had scholarships in both sports for basketball and softball. So played at the Division II level in both sports, and from that journey kind of realized how much I like strength and conditioning. It also helped me in my career and be able, I'm an undersized human, so I needed to be maybe faster, fitter, and stronger because I wasn't bigger to be short. That led me towards actually going into a career as a strength conditioning coach. So my first job outside of my undergraduate, after I graduated, I was a strength conditioning coach and an assistant softball coach at University of Wisconsin La Crosse, and then continued the journey there. Did a master's in exercise science. Came to Australia in 2004 to pursue a PhD in sports science after, of course, watching the 2000 Olympics hosted here in Sydney and watching essentially Australia overperform compared to population, and knowing that Australia was doing something special in sports science. And despite the medals we win in the USA at that time, Australia was definitely trailblazing in sports science, and the US was not doing that to the same degree, and definitely didn't have it within academic programs. So moved to Australia and have been here ever since. And to summarize those last 20 years, so since moving here in 2004, 21 years now, I've worked in a lot of sports, from rugby to football or soccer, and of course many years at Surfing Australia, so 6 years there, while also always being engaged in teaching and research, so the academic. So I've split across that for my entire career, and then of course time with Softball Australia, and a lot of time here at the state level as well in WA for softball.
Amazing. An amazing journey, and it's really just the beginning with the stuff you're doing, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. You've been researching more recently, and you can't see my screen because you're in Perth and we've got you on WebEx, and I love technology. But you've been doing some work with FIFA on their female health project with a really good friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Dee Anderson, amongst other experts across the globe. You've been writing, you've been reading, you've been researching, you've been gathering the data, you've been having great conversations, no doubt as well. And you've recently, and when I say you, I'm saying you as Soph, but also Edith Cowen, have created a relationship with the Orthopaedic Research Foundation of WA, and you're doing some research in conjunction with them. This is really interesting, and I'd love you to sort of start off by telling us a little bit about the research you've done so far in this area, and I'm talking ACLs and female athletes, but what this project is all about and how important you think it is at this point in time.
Yeah, that's actually a great one to bring up. So here at ECU, we do a lot of industry engaged PhD projects where an industry partner has a research question that they want to contribute to the funding of a PhD student. It's a great way for them to get a stipend while they also study. This project, as you mentioned, Orthopedic Research Foundation, they decided that they really wanted to investigate more specifically around women and girls ACLs. It is very in the news at the moment, and so they've basically funded a project with ECU. So we're co-funding this project to put a PhD student on, and that student was selected through a pretty rigorous process, and she has lived experience as well, and she's a physiotherapist by trade, so a really great person. So Jessica Lai, her lived experience with the ACL is competing as a national level weightlifter, and so she's torn her ACL while competing, and so understands that aspect. Is a physiotherapist by trade, but is now going to research and investigate aspects relating to what are we not quantifying, first of all, around evaluating characteristics that describe people that have or have not had an ACL injury. And then further down the track, after she does what we call cross-sectional studies, so just kind of looking what we can see between those that have had or don't have, or the affected or unaffected leg, she'll do a training study, and she'll look at comparing, and this hasn't been finalized, but she'll be looking at what's standard for providing rehabilitation routines for women and girls to return back to sport versus what is probably a quote unquote uh, best case or optimal kind of programming to return them back to sport and see what the outcomes are from that. So that's the project in a nutshell. Of course, I have a lot of collaborators. So my main collaborator here, who is leading a lot of fantastic projects, is Dr. Miles Murphy, and then of course with the entire team from Orthopedic Research Foundation and the orthopedic surgeons themselves. So it's really neat because obviously they are doing the surgeries. They have the pool of people, and they want to see these people succeed after they do those surgeries. Contrary to popular belief, they don't want to see them again. Um, that's the premise of the study. So there'll be a little cross sectional, trying to understand what we're not seeing. Because if we knew everything, it'd be going down. And here in Australia, the projected ACL injury incidence is projected to increase and potentially increase exponentially. And maybe surprising to everybody is that in the age group of 5 to 14, that'll increase exponentially as it currently stands in both boys and girls.
Wow. I I I'm going off topic. Well, when I say off topic, I'm not going off topic. I'm going off script a bit here because Jordan and I have a list of questions. But I just want to add to that. So when I was reading about this partnership or this project that is happening, and I was enthralled, I'll say. I was reading it going, wow, the stuff that they're working on here is amazing, and the group of stakeholders you've got involved obviously is pretty amazing. There was a quote in the article. There's quite a few quotes, but there's one quote in the article that I loved, and I feel like you're passionate about this, and obviously your students and your department and those who are working on this project are too. But the quote was, "We rarely consider the restraints on women athletes and the lack of structural support around them. This has to change." Is that quote in a nutshell, Soph, what you've seen over your time in sport that is really the catalyst for a lot of things that maybe haven't gone in the favour of female athletes, whether that be ACLs or anything else?
Yeah, and it is, and I think we're starting to pay attention to it, but we don't want to admit the truth is that we probably can't make up for lost time.
Mm.
So what I mean by that is, so it's great that we're paying attention to this now. We're starting to invest more. I'm sure we'll get, as you mentioned, we'll talk about AFLW and getting to a salary where they can move to full time, where they can increase the number of staff working with them and dedicated time to develop them. But the fact of the matter is, even the youngest of women in the AFLW have yet to have a lifetime provision of opportunity and development, particularly from a strength conditioning point of view. And when you're developing the musculoskeletal system, we know that the harder tissues like bone and ligaments and tendons, they're a lifetime of development. It's not muscles actually it's quite the easy one to develop, and it can develop really rapidly. Or harder tissues, we can see in the skeleton, for instance. This will be fun for Simone, like a fun fact. My favorite case study in the literature is an ex-baseballer. He was well into his 70s or 80s, hadn't thrown a ball since he retired, probably in his late 30s. And even 50 years later, you could see a substantial difference in the amount of bone mineral density he had in his pitching arm versus non-pitching arm. He hadn't pitched in 50 years.
Wow.
The laying down of the foundation of your musculoskeletal system, but particularly skeletal, and in that tendon and ligament are hard tissues. It's really laid down early when we're growing that wonderful skeleton, and it's through repetitive long-term development. You can't fast track it per se.
Mm-hmm.
So while I think it's wonderful that people are paying attention to the importance of strength, and I'm always an advocate for it, you also have to realize that you can't fully make up for that lost time. And I think people are expecting an immediate return on their investment because we've suddenly realized that we haven't been doing the right thing by these women. So that's the longer term yes from that really simple statement.
Yeah. I probably should. My other question I was going to ask, and I know Jordan's getting antsy here because he wants to jump in, but this question sort of off the back of that. So simplistically, in my non-sports science opinion, without any evidence, if I look at it from where I sit as a massive sports fan, following a lot of obviously women's sport and men's sport, and women just haven't had the opportunity to be in the gym, to have programs in the gym, to have support from an S&C perspective, basically forever. And here we are with AFLW academies, girls' participation in AFL in particular has skyrocketed along with cricket and other sports, football, soccer, but football. Moving forward, you mentioned earlier an exponential increase in ACL injuries. If we're laying foundations for those, or when I say if we're laying them, it seems from afar we are. Do you think we're still not providing that, or girls don't have access to that? Or should we be worried that we're still going to be talking about this in 10, 15 years?
Oh, we should 100% be worried that we'll still be talking about this. And the reason for this is there's some aspects of the development of athletes we can control. There's enormous aspects that influence them as people that we may not be controlling. And remember, everything's multifactorial, so it's not just a magic bullet that if we solve this problem, then everything goes away. But one of the things we observe is that so our systems are becoming knowledgeable, that it takes a lot to become an expert, to become an elite athlete. So you'll notice what we're doing is, as you've described, starting developmental pathways for those athletes. And people are starting to recognize if I'm not in that developmental pathway, it's really tough to get a crack later in life. And the funny thing about that later in life is, like, if you decide at 18 you wanted to switch over, the more developed a system is, the harder that becomes. So you think about the first couple of years of the AFLW, for instance, people were cross-coding from all over, right? Well, that was because we were leveraging the athleticism that they had, because the skill of those players wasn't at the level, because we hadn't had a pedigree of players that had played their whole life. Now you're seeing fewer and fewer cross-coders, right? What that's doing is that's creating a new thing where players are expecting to have to specialize early, because unfortunately our systems tend to deselect a lot. And once you get deselected, it's really rare for you to get reintroduced. Some of the evidence from that, though, is the earlier you specialize in a sport, where it's a sport like in this instance, I'm talking about footy, where it's good that you sample for a long period of time till you're 14 and 15, gaining skills from a basketball or a soccer, because you develop a nice, robust repertoire of movement and strength and coordination. You don't get that. If you specialize super early, you do the same movements from a very young age over and over and over again, and by of course, you become expert at that. But you also build a system that's only capable of tolerating that and gets overused very quickly. So I think we're swinging from one end where we were like, oh, they hadn't had a base, but we'll sort that out, way over to the other end that we're expecting them to be an expert in their sport from 12 and be only in that sport, and we're forgetting to develop the whole athlete. And we see this, and it's the monetization of club sport that we see in America. And then we like to copy it here in Australia, and I say, no, leave that mistake over there. That monetization that you pay to play more so that you look better at a younger age, so you get in that pathway. And if you're not in that pathway, it's hard to get in there. But once you're in it, it's a lot easier to stay in it.
Mm-hmm. That's crazy. Yeah, and as I said, this is why it's so important that we get to have conversations with experts like you, because my insight is so simplistic without knowing the details, but insightful, very scary, Soph, but really interesting. Jordan's been chomping at the bit here. He needs to ask a question, so I'm handing the reins over. Jordan, you've got the floor.
Thank you. I appreciate it. First of all, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, Soph. I'm very, very indulged in the world of footy, and especially women's footy, and to do with injuries, especially seeing some of the star players go down before a season's even started. It's heartbreaking, and in some aspects it ruins the game, because you expect to see such star performers out there that just unfortunately can't make it because they're done for the season before it even starts. And what you've said is really insightful and really detailed. And in fact, it's taken a lot out of my questions because you've already said so much, which is awesome. And it's really given me an insightful view of everything in general. I guess one thing I have to ask is, in terms of AFLW, and you mentioned that these girls are, potentially rupturing, damaging their ACLs at such a young age, and it is exponentially growing. And you mentioned how we've gone from one end of the scale where they're being pushed without any skills to they're expected to know everything. Where does it come in between, and how long is it going to take for us to figure that out? Because in the United States, over the last 5 years or so, there's been a lot of talk of CTE because that's been so prevalent in the future careers of NFL players. And we don't want that conversation to be had about AFLW stars because we don't want it to get to that point. So where is that middle line drawn, and how do we get there?
Yeah, listen, the fact of the matter is these are big systems moving things, right? In America, even more so. So there's so much in the pipeline around that. So I won't get into the CTE discussion, but you can see how once something's moving, it's like a freight train. And so to divert it is really, really difficult. I think that's why Australia has always been beneficial, because really it's only 25 million people, give or take. That's actually a very small ship, and you can be a lot more maneuverable. So I do believe we'll figure it out, or we won't. But we have more likelihood to be able to make a modification in the system. Here's what's interesting is that I think for women's sport more broadly, people are asking the question, is the way that we've done things the right way? Because you hear lots of people say we don't want to copy, per se, the men's pathway, although that's the first thing we do, because it's a lot easier to copy than it is to innovate. And the thing is, we've already treated our men and boys like disposable entities. We don't treat our men and boys any better, really, because you have to remember the number of ACLs that are reconstructed across the world every year, there's more men have ACL reconstructions, period, outright. I guess you could say it's because they have a larger proportion playing sport being the largest reason why people tear ACLs. But remember that we haven't figured this out for men. We just have kind of accepted it a bit. I think what we see is the rate differences you'll hear people talk about, like you hear the infamous, it's 2 to 8 times more likely in women. But just to clarify that, and I'm actually manipulating your question, but that's fine, is that I wish people would start saying it's 0 to 8 times. It's 0 to 8 times more likely, because when people report that, the likelihood of, I guess they're comparing like to like. So they'll say in women's soccer, but most of the times they're not being specific about the sport. Otherwise, they wouldn't give such a broad description. And the reason I say the 0 to 8 is because in some of the longest term research in skiing, downhill skiing. So like, here's one fact about downhill skiing. If you're elite, it's not if, it's when you'll tear your ACL. It's an enormously dangerous sport. So it's a great test case. So if there were going to be a risky sport, and I know that early in AFLW's history, people asked, is it too dangerous for women? And I kind of laughed a little bit. Because I think there is nothing more dangerous than flying down a mountain at 140 kilometers an hour on a blade. But we don't seem to think that's too dangerous for women. Here's the curious thing. It's the kicker. 25-year retrospective study looking at ACL injuries. No difference between the men's and the women's as far as the percentage of athletes and their actual rate of tearing ACL normalized to the amount of time they spend skiing. And you never hear anyone talk about that. And so we realize that it's possible for a sport to have the incidence of the injury or the incidence rate of the injury to be equal. And if it were only about them being women, that couldn't happen because those are women skiing. And the women skiing injure that ACL when they're elite, and that's the key one, when they're elite at the same rate for the study that I'm talking about, which is 25 years of retrospective data. And that's pretty impressive. It's nothing close to what we have in our other football codes. So when I look at that, I go, oh, there's something that can be done. And the thing about skiing being cool or not cool is that you don't get a choice in skiing to not do something 100%. You go down the mountain and the mountain decides momentum. There's no other coach determining if you do or don't do a run, right? Once you start the run, you do the whole run. But in team sport, you think about AFL, your coach dictates the type of training you have, how much stress that training has, and if you even do it at that intensity. And there's evidence to support, I'll give one cool study about even how we coach girls, is that they have longer practices but spend less time doing the skills work when you have the same coach coaching men versus women, meaning they spend more time stopping and talking instead of letting them just learn. So that has implications not for that one time, but when you accumulate that over time, that's a decreased opportunity for advanced skills or for advanced physical development, right? But in skiing, there's do or do not. There is no try. You go to the top of the mountain and no coach in the middle of the run goes, oh, quickly, let me pause you right there at 140K an hour before you take that bend and explain how you might do that. So I think skiing is what we call real world evidence of what happens when we remove things that have influence on our ability to develop an athlete versus when we have no ability just by the context of that sport. And I've talked about these studies, and there's more than one. But when you look within skiing, when you look at the amateur level, where there's a lot more, you don't launch someone down the mountain at 140K an hour. And there's a lot more coaching involved, and there's a lot of other constraints because you don't get all of the other things that elite skiers do. The difference between men and women in injury reappears. So that always tells me there's more involved than them just being women. So our over focus on them being women instead of getting the system right is really what the problem is. Will we fix it, Jordan, like your original question? I think if we start paying attention to what I just said, we're more likely to find out what we need to fix.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an amazing detail, really. And anyone watching, should there be people watching, will take away a lot from that. So thank you so much for that.
I'm
No worries.
a bit blown away, Soph, by that chat and that study and that insight. And I've got a bit of a follow-up question, and you've already you've already provided some insight into this for people watching, but for the simplists like me who just love watching sport and don't have the research knowledge, the evidence that you've been able to uncover over all these years, like what are some of the things that, and as I said, I'm prefacing this, you've already said some of it, but are there things you think people following sport just automatically think through bias of what they see in the media or things they hear or what they're told that aren't based on evidence? Are there things people are hearing about ACLs that you think you want to highlight aren't necessarily true?
Yeah, there's probably three things. The first is this idea that there's a spike in the elite women. Like there's this, people will call it the ACL epidemic. And maybe I'm being a bit academic about this, but an epidemic is something that spreads wildly and rapidly through a population. But our evidence says that in AFLW, for instance, is actually declining. So in the first year, we panicked because it was somewhere around the 7 to 8 times. And every season that goes by, it's going down. Do I think it's because we're doing anything specific? Nah. I just think we were totally unprepared. Like we were totally unprepared. We threw in these women, and it was, if I'm perfectly honest, it's one step away from malpractice. We should have known that was going to happen. The way in which we put them in a scenario to be on that expectation. But nonetheless, every year after that, it's gone down. When we look at women's soccer or we look at women's basketball, pretty much the incidence rate has remained static. It's always been high, but it's remained static. What's actually happened is their name. I don't know if that's comforting or uncomforting, because actually this has always been happening, but people didn't know their names, so they didn't care. It's not an epidemic. It's an epidemic of finally realizing the names of these women. There are so many women that have been tearing their ACLs at the exact same rate, I might add, and we never knew their name. That's the part we should be worried about, is that it took us this long to pay attention. But it's not going up. And it's not going up at all. It's pretty static. I'm bothered by it being static because based on the amount of research, we should be doing better. But not to place the blame on the research, but what's probably happening is two things. The research may not be focusing on the right things, and I can talk about that. That'll be the two falsifications that I'll talk about next. But also that we're doing more for the women. We are at probably just an equal rate that we're rising expectation. So we're staying at the same rate. So if we had kind of like prepared them and then raised expectation, then we would expect it to go down. But that's not what we're doing. We're increasing the number of games. We're increasing the intensity of those games. We're increasing the expectation of travel. We're increasing the international expectations. If I talk about the World Cup year, right? You go off a WSL or NWSL season, and then they had to jump into international windows, and a month long at probably the highest amount of social stress that these women could be under, and then they had to come down under. So long flights for everybody else, coming in and playing in the southern hemisphere. So all of these things happening simultaneously. They had been more prepared than they ever had been before, and they were expected more than they ever had been before. So it's staying static as a rate is probably thankful, to be honest. So I think the first thing I'd say is nothing's going up. That's a misnomer. It's not an epidemic. It's just always been, probably for the last 10 to 20 years, depends what sport you look at. Within the population, so at the elite level, I can say this definitively for soccer, over the last 20 years, it's pretty much been the same in elite women's soccer. That has the most data. So that's why I use that sport as an example. The next thing that we get wrong is we talk about the things we see as quote unquote different in women versus men and think that's the same as causal. To not be academic, I'll explain it like this. Just because you see something's different doesn't mean it's causing the effect you're looking for. So for instance, if you walked in a room and the only thing that you saw different between two people standing there over a dead body was that one person was wearing a red t-shirt. Not blood, just a red t-shirt. But everything else, they were identical twins. Would the difference in their shirt color tell you any more about the dead body on the ground? No. This is what I allude to as mistaking difference between men and women as necessarily giving us some kind of information about what's causing ACLs in women. Because I remind you, more men in the world tear their ACLs, so it's not like men are some like mythical, perfect, intact, never destructible ACL. They still tear their ACLs. So that mistake for difference being causal is really a problem. And so where I hear it, the two areas I hear that just don't have any evidence or evidence that's so weak we should really forget it is one, you'll hear people talk about the Q angle. So the angle of your basically thigh or your femur relative to your hips and the size of your hips. That being something causal for the ACL injury. There's no evidence for that. There's no prospective evidence to show that. And in fact, Q angle is more related to height than it is sex. Anyway. The next thing that I probably hear is around the menstrual cycle and that it causes ACL injury. And the reason for that is the menstrual cycle is obviously a cycle, so it goes in a circle. So the first thing to remember about that is when you are out there training for anything, let's remove it from this topic. And I say do a workout today. Tomorrow I don't get stronger. It takes time for I put a stimulus in there, then that causes a response, and then proteins grow. And this is not a biology lesson, but there you go. So it takes time. So that means I get the response much later, days, weeks later. But remember that the menstrual cycle is a cycle. It returns back to its on average 28 days, but realizing that a normal cycle varies and that's still normal. So it isn't exactly 28 days. Few people have exactly 28-day cycles. And the thing about it is we've oversimplified it. The research hasn't been held to the quality that it should in understanding that it's a cycle. And there's probably as many studies showing that ACL injuries occur in one quote unquote phase of that cycle as another phase. And that's not surprising because again, it goes in a circle, right? So things take a while to affect. But even with that said, women experience their cycles in many different ways. And you'll have to trust the researchers that we have to understand the cycle of each individual woman before we make grand claims. It is very individualized, and the research hasn't done the best job doing that. So at best, we can say we don't know yet, but the likelihood is it's much more complex than assuming that that's the reason. And it goes back to the same thing. Why are we focusing on it so much? And why are people trying to blame? And I'm going to use the word blame, potential increases in injury on that is because we're playing the difference games, going back to that original example. And so it's nice to tie all these things together. If it were really so causal that it causes an increase in your risk of ACL injury, then that example of that 25-year retrospective evaluation of those downhill skiers, it would have to be present there too. So it's possible to find populations where it doesn't occur, which means there's other factors involved. Now, I really want to understand more about improving women's understanding of their own menstrual cycle, or if they're on oral contraceptives, or if they have disruptions, or if they have dysmenorrhea or menstrual cycle dysfunction more broadly. All of those things we need to pay attention to, but we need to pay attention to that. Ensure women are healthy, that they realize that their menstrual cycle is just a barometer of their health oftentimes, and stop medicalizing it and thinking that we know even more than we already do to be able to be confident to say that that's actual causal for injury. And there's a heap of reasons why you shouldn't be making those claims without strong evidence. The first of which is when you make those types of claims or you make those types of suggestions, people remember it. You're priming someone to actually already believe that a particular point in their cycle puts them at risk, and then they change their behavior, likely in a way that's not advantageous for them. And that might have more of an effect than actually the original effect you claim occurred. So that's something that we talk about all the time, that layering onto someone a belief changes your behavior sometimes more than actually doing an intervention that changes your function. So to say something different, there's some really cool studies that I'll talk about, and it's called stereotype threat. I'll give an example for Simone, which is around throwing. And you know the saying that you throw like a girl, and that's assumed that women can't throw. Now we know that's not true, but there's a bias. There's a way to imply that. And when you say something like, okay, we're going to bring in men and women here, and we're going to get you to do a throwing task for accuracy. Now, we're looking at this because men typically throw better than women. When you do that, you prime a subject. Think of this like priming someone, saying, oh, in the days leading up to your to the bleeding phase of your menstrual cycle, you are more likely at risk. Or is it during? Or is it wherever you prime? Now that person's thinking about it, and it affects their behavior. In that throwing example, by just telling someone that in this instance men are probably better at throwing, this you throw like a girl, women perform less. But when you change that instruction to say, actually in this task right here, we expect things to be equal, they perform equally. So we know that the things that we say impact the way they behave, subsequently impacts the way they perform. And then that's done over and over and over again until you're a self-fulfilling prophecy. So until we have really strong evidence of that, which I can definitively tell you we do not, we shouldn't be making that our first point of call, and we shouldn't be prioritizing that discussion for that reason. We should only be prioritizing the discussion around menstrual cycles more broadly, or just understanding our cycles, whether we are or are not on the different type of oral contraceptives, around their health, and ensuring that it's healthy, that it's perceived as normal, and if it seems as if it's different or off, that we get them the appropriate medical support by experts. And that would be first protocol, of course, your general practitioner.
So many things in there. The behaviours part, just it seems so obvious now that you say it, but without you talking about it, I hadn't thought. I can say that I'm willing to take on any man in a throwing accuracy competition. So if anyone is watching the Crumbs, any males out there who do want to do that, that might be a good episode. That one might go viral. So I'll tag you in that one. I love that. I've got one more question, and you've given us so much of your time. I'm so thankful, and I want to let Jordan have the last say. But my last one is, if I said to you, you can take charge of the freight train, you can take charge of what happens now, based on all the things we've been talking about, what would you do? Or what's one thing you'd do tomorrow if you were, given the chance to run the show?
Yeah, the number one thing I would do is, while this isn't popular because we're finally getting money at the top, we're finally getting, and it's not even great. And it's very disparate. So country to country, we act like women's sport is taking off, but a majority of countries have not taken off. So let's not think it's doing better than it is, by the way. But the next thing I would do is to vastly invest money when girls are very young, is to, get physical education back on the agenda and to get physical educators knowledgeable and understanding the biases I just talked about. Whether we realize it or not, the physical educators perpetuate those biases every day. And that's the very first start of girls not believing. And once you don't believe, then you start to not do. And if you don't do, you don't get better. I have a saying all the time, you are what you do repeatedly. But oftentimes we cut that off so young for girls that we never get to see who they could have been if they did it repeatedly because we stopped them too early. That's because we think we have to save them. Something's too risky. It's too dangerous. We have to protect. That's not the things we need to protect women from. I guarantee you that. We need to protect women, and particularly girls, from abuse, of course. We need to protect girls from being told they're incapable. We need to protect them from not being afforded opportunities and educated and qualified staff before they're expert, before they're excellent, before they're an elite athlete. So I would invest a substantial amount of money at the youngest of ages just to be athletic, not to be an elite athlete, just to be athletic. Because if you never become an elite athlete, you become a healthy person.
An amazing answer. Thanks, Soph. Jordan,
Yeah.
I'm going to finish us off.
Well, you've given us so much information about this, and it's truly breathtaking because there's been so much said that can be taken on by anyone. So I wanted to end off on sort of a lighter-hearted one, and just for you to explain your pathway. Like you mentioned, you started off by being a D2 scholarship athlete in basketball and softball, which is incredible, by the way. So props to you for that. But you've also gone through such amazing organisations such as Softball WA, Softball Australia, FIFA, Sport Integrity Australia. And to be quite frank, you've had a lot of experience in what you do, and that's mainly why you're able to give us such insightful information. For that, we appreciate. So my final question to you is, what sort of advice would you give to people who are looking into researching this type of stuff, with your 20 years of experience under your belt?
The best part about this is that I don't think you need 20 years of research to look at maybe some of the things we're being given as coaches to review, or reading the research, to think critically and ask if it really makes sense. And so I think my take home, my advice to everybody is, if you've listened to everything thus far and you found some things surprising, but not surprising in a way that, oh, that couldn't be true, surprising because, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. Think about how many other instances you've just assumed or just kept perpetuating something that you think is right. Ask the counterfactual, we call it. Start to really ask why. So my take home is, become your 2-year-old self again, of asking why. And if people don't have legitimately good reasons, it's better to say we actually don't know than to be repeating the wrong information.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Great advice, Soph. So if you've been amazing, I've loved just personally getting to chat with you, and it's always a great time hearing from you. But in particular today, just the amount of information you've shared, your knowledge, your research, the insights. I mean, you've blown me away, and I know the listeners will love it. We're so thankful for your time and appreciative. And it's the people like you who give up their time and, working in sport for a long time. There's some great people, not everybody's great, but there are great people who often share, and today's another opportunity. We don't have a lot of followers on the Crumbs yet, although I'm going to convince you to collab on a post on Instagram, and I bet you've got a lot of followers, so you're going to up our average. But people are going to hear things from this podcast that they didn't know, and these are the conversations we have to have, and people need to hear, because then, as you said, they're going to have these conversations with their friends and their family, and they're going to share this recording, and other people are going to hear it and listen to it, and they're going to start to question, and that's what we want. ultimately. So I can't thank you enough on behalf of Jordan and I and everybody following. A huge thank you. We'd love to get you in the studio one day. So if you're in Melbourne, we'd love to get you in and have another chat. But thanks so much. And yeah, until next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Simone. Thanks, Jordan.
All the best, Soph.
Bye, Soph. So the one to watch is something we finish with every week here at the Crumbs. And the one to watch this week is the Crumbs on Instagram.
Absolutely.
Because the Crumbs on Instagram, we had a shout out a few weeks ago. We had 10 measly followers. Nothing was happening. And here we are today. We've got 122. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who got on board and supported the Crumbs and has given us a like. And in particular, given us a like when we haven't really put out any content yet. We really appreciate that here. We're going to get some more stuff out, and we're going to be, getting some cool stuff to you guys so you can follow women's sport and what's happening around the world. And we had 4 winners. So we offered up a shirt, some Crumbs merch, and it seemed people are actually interested in it, which kind of surprised me, even though it looks cool, I think. So there's 4 winners: Stacey Barnes, Gab Bevan, who probably tagged more people than I know.
I think she had about 50 comments on that one.
Yep, she had a few comments, so she had to win. Chase Potts and Narelle Gostre. So to the 4 of you guys, we're going to reach out to you, get your sizes and send you out some Crumbs merch that we hope you'll wear proudly. And a big thank you to everybody who got on, shared our post, commented, followed at all. We really appreciate it. To wrap things up, it's been great to have you on, Jordan. You've been fantastic in your first episode. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Next week we'll be back. Hopefully we'll get Caro on board, although maybe you don't hope so. And let's see, Caro, you've got some big shoes to fill here. Jordan's done a pretty good job. I'm not sure the followers are gonna necessarily want you back. I guess we might do a poll.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And see if people want Caro or maybe don't.
Or maybe both. I don't know.
Well, yeah, let's see what the followers think, our 122 followers.
Yes, a big upstage from 10, so it's great.
All right, see you guys next week, and thanks for tuning in.
Appreciate it.